With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Tes. We left off on Daf Tes, Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amud by the Mishnah. We will first learn that the Shalmei Chagiga that should be offered lechatchila on the first day of Yom Tiv, if it was not offered at all, we have the concept of tashlumin, which is compensation payment, which means that it could be brought, and therefore it should be brought throughout the subsequent days of Yom Tiv. Now, if a person did not bring the Chagiga carbon throughout any of the days of Yom Tiv, then you no longer can compensate for this loss of a mitzvah. And the Mishnah is going to quote a pasuk in Koheles that's quoted in many different areas. Shlomo HaMelech speaks about a me'uvis, something that's crooked, that lo yuchal liskoin, that cannot be straightened, and a chesrein, something that's lacking, that lo yuchal limanis, that can no longer be counted. We're going to see on Tes Amud Beis this pasuk in reference to other failings, but our Mishnah connects it to someone who didn't even bring the shlamim on the days of tashlumin. You know, on Daf Beis, we quoted 2 ways of understanding tashlumin, which is here on Daf Tes. Do we say that the obligation is of the first day? If you didn't bring it on the first day, then you can bring it on the second day or on the third day, but it's payment of a chiyuv of the first day. That's called tashlumin l'rishon. Another way of looking at compensation payment is that even though lechatchila you're supposed to bring it on the first day, if you didn't bring it on the first day, it becomes now the obligation of the second day. If you didn't bring it on the second day, it becomes the obligation of the third day. And l'nafkamina between these 2 ways of approaching the concept of tashlumin is like we spoke in Daf Beis. If someone was exempt from bringing all of the karbanis on the first day, for example, they were blind, for example, they were lame, and during Yom Tov they got healed, if it's tashlumin l'rishon, since on the first day they were exempt, they continuously are exempt. If once you don't bring it on the first day, it becomes like the new chiyuv of this current day, then there's a side to argue they will be chayiv. Now we're going to have a typical daf of kachim. We're going to be discussing how do we view the nighttime when it comes to karbanos. First of all, in Yiddishkeit, for the Jewish people, the day begins with the night. Hayoim hoylech achar halayla. Shabbos begins Friday night. For the Goyim, for the Bnei Noach, it's the other way around. In the creation, the Torah says, Vayiyere vayiboiker, true. But after the Mabul, the Torah says, Yoim v'layla lo yishboisu. Yoim, then Layla. And by the Yidden, we go back to the Vayiyere vayiboiker. Kachim, interestingly, the day begins with the day. So whenever you read in the Chumash, carbon can only be brought for 1 day and 1 night. The 1 day begins during the daytime of the day. And the parts of the animals that weren't yet brought by the day, like the fats, they could be offered on the subsequent night, even though in the Jewish calendar, the night is already the next day. Parenthetically, the Rebbe wrote a Gavaldik letter. Why is it that our Siddur begins with Moed Ani? Why doesn't our Siddur begin with Maidav? It's a good question, because the Siddur should begin with the Seder Hayoim. And the Rebbe answers, since Tefilla is b'makim karbanos, and by Kachim, Halayla Hoylech Achar Hayoim, so you begin the day with Moed Ani. Now, hold on a second. There are certain people that are obligated to bring a carbon on a specific day. Just for example, a Zav. We're going to go through the dinim quickly of a Zav. After the 7 clean days, if he became a major Zav, then on the 8th day, he has to bring a carbon. How do we view that? Option number 1 is that really he's obligated to bring the carbon the night going into the day, the night prior. That is when the chiyuv of the carbon begins. It's only like for a technical reason, you can't bring a carbon at night, so you bring it in the morning. Or no. Until the morning, there's no obligation yet, because it's not yet the 8th day of his count. Even though, again, for other areas in halacha, the 8th day would begin the night prior. This is called Laila Mechusar Zman, or Laila Ein Mechusar Zman, and there are many consequences of this machlokes, and some of it we will touch upon in today's daf. We're going to have the famous statement that the Alter Rebbe quotes in Tanya Perek Tezvav about Ein Adoima, to someone who learns Torah 100 times, which was then the norm. Imagine to review everything 100 times, versus to someone who reviews it 101 times. And the Avodai, Asher Loy Avodai, in the Gemara it speaks about a tzaddik. The Alter Rebbe applies it to a Benini. We'll speak it out when we learn the Sugya. We're going to have a very challenging statement that the Gemara gives over here regarding poverty. The words are that poverty is beautiful for the Jewish people, like a red strap on a white horse, almost sounding like poverty is some sort of positive thing. And there are so many other chazals that explicitly write how poverty is not a positive thing. Asher b'shvil tatashasher. That's a motivation. The Gemara in Bava Basra says that anius is difficult for a person like 50 makas, etc., etc. So we're going to share some Hasidic insights and understanding this statement. We're going to have other applications of mu'uvas, she'en yuchal liskoin, and much, much more. Chavra, let's start here again. Daf Tes, Amud Aleph, top of the Amud almost, with the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Mishal Chag b'Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. If a person did not bring Chag, I know means a festival, but here it means the Koren Chagiga. One did not bring the Koren Chagiga on the first day. Here you already see by implication that lechatchila you should bring it on the first day. Let's not forget what we learned in the last sugya. The last sugya is that when you come to bring it, aleph, it doesn't have to be only one. If you have many people to feed, you can bring many. Another important thing, when you come to bring it, you should at the outset attempt to bring all of them if you're bringing many. We learned yesterday that if, let's say, you designated 10 chagigas because you have 100 eineklach to feed. So if you bring many karbanos, and if for some external reason you couldn't bring all of them, you can bring it on the subsequent day. But lechatchila, you should try to bring it all in one time. That's because the pasuk, that's the source of a chagiga, is v'chagoisem oisoi chag l'Hashem, Parshas Emor, oisoi. It's like one. It doesn't mean you can't bring two or you can't bring three. You have to bring it in one time. But if you didn't bring it at all, then says the Mishnah, this is what we call tashlumin. You can compensate for it. Another nuance, another chiddush. Mele Pesach has 7 days. The holy regel means up until Shvi, which is also in the Holy Land, Achron Shel Pesach. What about Sukkot? So we already learned in this new cycle, I think 3 times, or maybe more, the concept of Shmini Atzeres is regel bifnei atzmai for Pizar Kishav, as we went through those 6 halachas. So can you bring the tashlumen of the Chagiga of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres? So says the Mishnah that the Yonta for Achlen Shel Chag, and even though Benegeya, Payis, Zman, Regel, Korban, Shir, and Beracha, as we learned many times, Rashi and Tosfos, what that means, it's considered a separate holiday. But as far as the din of Tashlumin is concerned, Shmini Atzeres, by the very fact it's called the 8th, if it would be a new Yom Tov, it would be called number 1. It's considered the Hem Shechab, and you can bring it on Shmini Atzeres. However, Avar Haregel B'Loichag. But if the Yom Tov went by and you didn't bring it, then Eina Chayev Ba'achri Yusay. Eina Chayev Ba'achrayis is a detail of a concept. What's this detail? What happens, my friends, if I designated a carbon and I lost it? Do I have to bring another one? Am I responsible for it? If I lost it during Yom Tov, yes, I do. If I lost it after Yom Tov, after Shmini Atzeres, since even if I would have had it, I would bring it on the Mizbeach, but not L'Shem Chagiga. Just to make that clear, if I had an animal that was designated for a Chagiga and the animal is wholesome and it's here, it's not that I don't bring it at all. I have to bring it as a Nedava, but it's not a Chagiga. So therefore, if I lost it, I don't even have to get another one to replace it because there's no more chiv. I lost the mitzvah. And al zen nemar, and for such a mitzvah, King Solomon was saying that this is the mu'uvas, the crooked thing, lo yuchal liskoin, that cannot be straightened. This is the chesrin, the lack, lo yuchal lihimanis, that can no longer be counted, like chaval, it's lost. Yom Tov fast, you can never bring the chagiga. Shimon ben Menashe says, he agrees that you can't bring it. But he says that this verse of Koheles is not referring to such a type of sin. You know what it's referring to? That's only if a person had a relation with a woman with whom he's not allowed to have a relation. Now, by the way, there are many women with whom we cannot have a relation. Now, with anyone other than your wife. But there's differences in halacha. There are certain women that if, God forbid, you have a relation with them, then if you're not violating an isur kares, if there is a child born from that union, the child will not be a mamzer. That's how we paskin. Only if the union is prohibited of the penalty of kares, then the child is a mamzer. Now, we're going to learn in Yavamis, Rabbi Akiva holds any chayiv lavin also creates a mamzer. We don't paskin that way. But if a person had a relation with an edver, and from that came a child, in the time where whichever opinion you will follow, the child is a mamzer, that is a mu'uva she'eni yochel liskan. Because even when the person does a tshuva, ma'ahava, and the zedoinois becomes transformed into zachiyois, but the mamzer is a mamzer. And the mamzer's children remain a mamzer. And on this, we should know, ki yadua, that the Mittler Rebbe wrote a sefer called Pekei Achivrim, and he wrote a sefer concerning the Baal Tshuva of Rabbi Yosef Beshenkovich, which is a beautiful Hasidic story. And that story points out that even in a case, that was a Yid that married a non-Jew, who had non-Jewish children, which is the same thing because then the sin lives on. He did Azah Tshuva Shalema, ki yadua by that story, that it fixed that as well. But that's an extraordinary amount of tshuva. That means even where Chazal say you can't do tshuva, tshuva can be done, but that's a big effort. And but normally that's some uvash and yochel liskan, because the sin lives on. That's the reason why the body decomposes after we pass away, because if we ever had hana from anything that's prohibited that affected the body, that has to decompose. Versus tzaddikim, that they never had hana from anything else, the body can remain intact. Okay, now im toimer. Why it says the Mishnah? Im toimer is normally a word in Tosfos. The Mishnah im toimer begoine v'goizul. If a person will steal or will rob, you can't say it's a mistake that cannot be fixed, because yachalu lachzira v'yisakim. You can fix it. Now, sometimes you lost that which you stole. You ruined it. You can give back money compensation for certain avedas. You can compensate, but havlad mamzer, the child is living. I disagree with that. I disagree with Rab Shimon ben Menasya. Mesukan means something that was straight that became crooked. So it's not about what sin did you do, but it's about the matziv of the sinner. If the sinner is what we call a tinek shenishba, if a sinner is a Jew after 1900 years in Golus, that's never mu'uvas le'yochel liskan, because he was never fully straight. It can only refer to a case that had a Talmud Chacham that went away from the Torah, and when he went away from the Torah, not that he had mamzerim, any sin that he did, that is mu'uvis she'ena yochel liskan. But if it's not coming from a person, that was fully straight, no matter how grave the sin, this is not the verse of Shlomo HaMelech. Or really, this is a very Hasidic word. Ultimately, who's a perfect tzaddik? We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. We don't have perfect tzaddikim. So you can't apply this pasuk to the people, to the generation that lives in Golus. All right, let's go. First of all, how do you know that you can bring tashlumen on Shmini Atzeres? Shmini Atzeres, for the 6 dinim that are enumerated in the mnemonic of Pizar, Kishav, it even has another name. It's not called Sukkos. Right? They make another Shechiyanu. V'chulei. Immediately that you can make the tashlumin even on Shmini Atzeres, Rabbi Yishmael, because it says the word Atzeres on the holiday of Shvi Shal Pesach. It says the word Atzeres on the holiday of Shmini Shal Pesach, and it says Atzeres by Shmini Shal Chag. Malahalon, 7th day of Pesach is clearly Pesach. Right? We don't even make a Shechiyanu on Shvi Shal Pesach. It's part of Yom Tov. Therefore, you can do Tashlumin, Afkan le Tashlumin. That's called Exeda Shava. Now, we have throughout Shas, we have a concept called Exeda Shava Mufna versus Exeda Shava that's not Mufna. And in short, it means as follows. No one can make up Exeda Shava on their own. But the words that someone heard from their teacher, these words are used for Exeda Shava. We only heard the words. Atzeres, Atzeres. Which Atzeres? For which limud, that Hashem did not tell Moshe Rabbeinu. That's something that we have to figure out on our own. And whenever we have 2 words and we're trying to make Exeda Shava, but there's a logical reason why to refute Exeda Shava, then many Exeda Shavas are refutable. However, if the word that's being used is completely superfluous, called in the Gemara mufna, if the word is mufna, then even if there's a logical reason why to break the Exeda Shava, you say, no, this is the Exeda Shava. No, Hashem wrote an extra word only to make the link, even though it's not rational. Another nuance, do these words have to be extra in both places? That's called mufna mishnei tzedadim. Or only one of them being mufna is enough for you not to be able to refute it. That's a machlokes that we have in Amoraim. And our Gemara is going to fit according to both, even though the Gemara doesn't go into this nuance over here. So the Gemara says mufna, that this atzeres, right? It's really both. They are superfluous. And if it would not have been superfluous, we would have refuted it. The ilab mufna ikala mifla. Malashi shal Pesach. Again, we're saying that 7th day of Pesach shekain einoi chalik mishulafanav. Shviya shal Pesach is not separated from the 6th day of Pesach. It's not different. It has the same name. It has the same rules. However, time of b'shmini shal chag shechalik milafanav, like we mentioned, pizar kishav. Okay, so you can refute it. However, we're not going to refute it. Why? Because atzeres is superfluous. It's an extra word. Lo'e, indeed, or lo'e be'emes afnuya mufna. How is it superfluous? Because what does the word atzeres mean? Atzeres means, I know there's Hasidish atzeres. The pshat of atzeres is stop. You have a stop sign. Atzor. Stop means don't do malacha. So since the Torah writes concerning shiur shel Pesach, lo yisasa malacha, the word atzeres is not needed. B'chlal, don't even use the word atzeres. Oh, my atzeres, a word atzeres means stop from doing work. Well, it says concerning shiur shel Pesach, lo yisasa malacha. So therefore, the word atzeres, the cost of Rachman Olam by Pesach, it's lafnuye. And again, according to the Manda Amrim, we have this in Nida Daf Chav Beis and in many other places that it has to be mufna mishnei tzedadim. So the same thing in Shmini Atzeres, the Torah says, "Komalechas avoda lo yisasu." Also, so why does the Torah also use the word Atzeres for Shmini Atzeres? It's used for this Gzeira Shava, for us to now learn that Tashlumin of Sukkos could be made on Shmini Atzeres. Yes. In other words, Gzeira Shavos, some Gzeira Shavos are refuted, some Gzeira Shavos are not refuted. Refuted based on logic. Not refuted because even though logically they're not compatible, but if the words are extra, then this must have been that which God had in mind when he said these two words. Good.
The limit could be argued, just not the fact that it isn't shown.
The logic of the comparison can be argued, correct. Now, this is Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael is a Tanach. But Rabbi Yochanan was the one that introduced us with this atzeres. However, the Gemara says there was a Tanach without a name, the Ma'aseh Mahacha, that has another source. Again, that we're saying that the Tashlumen of Chag HaSukkos can even be made on Shmini Atzeres. The Tanya it says, and guys, this pasuk is the key verse. This is the pasuk in Parshas Emor where it says, "V'chagoisam oisoi Chag Lashem Shivas Yamim." It happens to be this pasuk is regarding Sukkos, but this is the source for Chagiga. Even though we're going to see in next daf on daf Yud that not so pashut, that one might have interpreted the Chagoisim Oisim Chag Lashem means make it into a party. But no. But we know the bottom line is we know that Chag means a carbon Chagiga. It says 7 days. Lachatchila, maybe you can bring the Chagiga any day that you want. That's why the Torah says Oisoi it. The singular doesn't mean one animal. Like we said, you can bring many animals. The singular means 1 day. Now, by the way, if it's 1 day, it's a given. The 1 day should be the first day. If it should ideally be brought on 1 day, of course, why would you delay it? First day. If you delay it, then you can bring it on the next day.
Why did you look at the 1 day as all 7 days?
So very good. I'm very happy. So I want you to know that we have to learn a lot of Torah Shabbal Peh to become familiarized with this logic. This is not human logic. This is godly logic. All of the brises go like this. But let's open our minds, and that's the way. We have to rectify the way we think. We have to align our minds with this. We wouldn't have said this on our own. If Atzeres means Shavuos, yes, it does. Shmini Atzeres does not have his own Koren Chagiga. Very good. Very good. Okay. Im Kain Lama Nemar. I just want to repeat for if people didn't hear. Tzvika was asking whether Atzeres has its own Re'iyah and Chagiga, and the answer is it does not. It's 3 times a year. Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos. Okay. Now, in Kain Lama Nemar Shiva. So why do you have in this verse Shiva? That's to tell you the concept of compensation, Tashlumin. Now, Uminayin, the Braisa continues. Okay, how do you know that by Sukkot you can even bring it on Shmini Atzeres, which is a novelty, and answers this Braisa, Talmud Leimer, B'chodesh HaShvi'i Tochoy Goyis. Herst, Netanel, you can do the Chagiga. Chagiga means korban on the whole 7th month. Now that's adding, but 1 second, maybe taka the whole month. Iba Chodesh HaShvi'i Yochel Yechoy Goyilach taka the whole month. No, Oisoi. That's especially for you. They had you in mind when they said this. You should grasp this. Oisoi Atochoy. What does Oisoi mean? On Yom Tov. Exactly what we didn't say before, we're saying now. It means on the Yom Tov, okay, elated. So either you learn it from the V'chagoysam Oisoi, or because you have Atzeres, and it's important to have this Machlokes Tanoim, because if we would have lived at these times of Chazal, if I would not have heard from my Rebbe Atzeres, I wouldn't adopt this. You have to, unless you're a Talmud of Rabbi Yishmael, but if you would follow another school like Rabbi Akiva, then you wouldn't necessarily accept that limud. So it's important to have another one. Okay.
What do they do with the Tzeres?
So l'chayda Atzeres, I was to mention, Atzeres doesn't only mean to stop. Atzeres means to gather in. Chassidus speaks about Atzeres. That means whenever you go through an experience, we all know that if you're not going to stop, not from not working, to stop and to take something that's b'makiv l'pnimius, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it, which is really the whole sukkah is like an atzeres Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. All of the oidas that came b'makiv are taken in. We can put the lulav into our heart. There's a concept of pause and take it in. I think the world has evolved a little bit in this sense, and they understand this a lot better. That's the meaning of atzeres. Not for something new to happen, but for something that already happened, for it to register that it happened. That's the meaning of atzeres.
We also have a biker in the parish last week with Neris, Baboiker.
So what's Baboiker?
No, I'm saying it's teaching us that there's more than it's also Gzira Shava, no? Okay,
could we say that? Let's go right. Okay. Now, my tashlumin. Again, this is the machlokes that we quoted on that base. Rabbi Yochanan says tashlumin means tashlumin l'rish. The obligation of Chagiga is on day number 1. If you didn't bring it on day number 1, the obligation is of day number 1. You can do it on day 3. You can do it on day 6. But it's the obligation of day 1. Rabbi Oishia says, no. Tashlumin zelozeh. Each day becomes, so to say, adopts or creates a new chiyuv. If you didn't do it on day number 1, it's now the chiyuv of day number 2. Like my nafkemina, my benayu, I'm going to say that. I'll tell you, chiged, if someone was lame on the first day, and we learned in the first Mishnah in the Masechta that chiged is one of the people that are exempt of the oilas re'iyah and the shalmei chagiga, and then v'nis pashet, they heal, they straighten out by yoimasheni ikabenayu. And the Gemara words it. Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the concept of tashlumin means lo rishain, we say kiven lo chazi b'rishain. Since you are exempt on the first day, you're no longer obligated on the second day. The reason of the exemption no longer exists, doesn't matter. It's the chiyuv of the first day. Rabbi Yishia Amar, that is tashlumin zelozeh. Therefore, aflagavdi lechazi b'rishain, chazi b'shein. Frek the Gemara now on Rabbi Yochanan. Guys, put on your kachim hat, and we're going for a dive into kachim. Frek the Gemara, me Amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Didn't Chizkiah tell us? Now, what are we speaking about? So let me see a few quick words of introduction. A person who becomes a nazir, let's say without specifying days, Stam Nazirus 30 days or 60 days or whatever the days are. When the days of Nazirus ends, there's a whole process of how one weans oneself off the Nazirus, which will include bringing korbanos. But if the nazir during the days of the vow became tummy to corpse tuma, not tuma to other tumas, but to tmei meis, many consequences. Let's say they were 30 days nazir. If they became tummy, even at the end, all the days that they counted is scrapped out. First, you have to become tahor from the tumah. Then you have to bring special korbanos, not the korbanos of a nazir. Different korbanos for the fact that you became tummy while you were a nazir. Now, part of the tahara process for any tumei meis is 7 days, right? 7 days, 3rd day, 7th day. So you go through the 7 days. On the 8th day, you bring the korbanos of a nazir. You automatically now begin to count again. Now, let me ask you a question. Person became tummy, and before they got out of the tumah, they became tummy again. Do they have to bring one set or two sets of karbonos for the tuma when they finally become pure? And the answer is that if they became tummy multiple times, but in one uninterrupted period of tuma, so they became tummy, Nazirus, and let's say even on the seventh day of the seventh, they become tummy again, they have to undergo the purification process again, but they will not be chayiv to bring two sets of karbonos. On the other hand, if they became tamei on the eighth day, even though they didn't bring the karbonos yet, but since it's during the daytime of the day, they could bring the karbonos. If they become tamei again, they're not going to bring the carbon now, they're tamei now. But when they finish the purification process, they're going to bring two sets of karbonos. Farvas, because they became tamei after the old tuma ended, even though it didn't really end, but potentially it really ended. Question will be, what happens if a person became tamei the night going into the eighth? It's already outside the 7 days, but at night we can't bring a carbon. Again, how do we view the night? Let's read inside. Chizkiah says that nitma bayoim, if you become tamei a second time during the 8th day, even though you didn't bring the first set of karbanos, but it's considered as if you brought the karbanos because you could have brought the karbanos. And now when you finally become pure the second time, maybe, you know what the words maybe means? Maybe means you bring two sets of karbanos. But if you become tamei again, it means you were a nazir. In the middle of the nazirus chavre, you became tamei. You are going through the process. You went through the 7 days. Now it's the night going into the 8th. Says Chizkiah, Eina maybe. You're not going to bring karbanos again. You're not going to bring two sets at the end of this purification because it's considered you became tamei still in the first tumei days. But Rabbi Yechanan Amar, Balayla Nami, maybe. Balayla Nami, maybe. Now, what's the logic of Rabbi Yechanan? At least initially, why is this Akasha? Look inside the second Rashi in the medium Rashis under the Gemara, directly under the Gemara, the second line, the end of the line. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, Hoyel v'tavalu tumasai. You went to the mikvah on the 7th day. And by the way, going to the mikvah is not enough. 7th day, you need for it to, the 7th day has to end. It has to become dark because if you remember the first Mishnah in Brachas, there's some lingering tumah that goes until the night. And the head of Shimshoi, now it's already dark. It's suns. Here it's really tzeis hakechavim. Doesn't mean sunset. That's the whole tzeis hakechavim to Daven Maidev. Says Rabbi Yechanan, you are chayiv in a carbon. You can't bring it at night, but you're chayiv in a carbon. Even though it's not roy, since you're chayiv, now you become tamei. Now you got to bring another set, two sets at the end. So look at the words of Rashi. Alma, afagav de loy ra'ul carbon. Even at a time where you're not ra'ui for a carbon, yesh loy tashlumin. You get the question. So why is it that if someone was chigir on the first day and they're not ra'ui carbon? And Taka Rabbi Yechanan says tashlumin l'rishayin. Why would you be exempt? Rabbi Yechanan will hold that even when someone is not ra'ui l'carbon, there's still tashlumin for it. Now that's all predicated on the understanding that night is a time that that's not ra'ui l'carbon, and that's not necessarily correct. Really, as we'll see, one can hold that night it essentially is the time to bring a carbon. It's the 8th day. The Torah says that karbanos cannot be brought at the nighttime of the night. But once you're going to view night as a time there's a chiyuv already, then you can't. Then it's mamash apples and oranges. Even now it's a stretch, but that's the stretch. So let's read inside the Gemara. So the Gemara says the first answer is Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Tuma is different. Tuma is the exception. Shami tuma. In other words, any carbon that cannot be brought because of tuma, which by the way is included the karbanos of a nazir. It's all about he became tamei. Always tuma reasons allows for a tashlumin. So says Rabbi Yirmiyah. And what was our my benayu? Not tuma. Chigir. Chigir is completely. If you're a chigir, you're not chayiv at all. If you're only tamei, tuma is, you can't bring it when you're tamei, but there's always tashlumin for tuma. And by the way, that's not so simple. So maskiv law Rav Papa regarding Rabbi Yirmiyah's approach, daf Pesach sheni daf Tesamad Beis tashlumin derishin hu. Then I would argue that if someone was tamei on Pesach Rishon, and everyone agrees that you have to bring now the carbon Pesach sheni, So you'll interpret that concept by saying, even though you were tamei, Tuma never disallows tashlumin, make tashlumin. That's only if Pesach Sheni is an act of tashlumin. Many opine that Pesach Sheni is not viewed as compensation. Now, this is a huge machlekes. There ain't kind of welcome to go into it. But if you're going to look at it that way, then you have no proof from Pesach Sheni that Tuma doesn't stop tashlumin. We're back to the question. So El Amarav Papa, the answer is Ksama Rabbi Yechanan. Laila eina mechusar zman. Here we go. By Kachim, I know that by Kachim you don't bring korbanos at night. But once in our case, the person was tummy. They went through 7 days. They went to the mikvah on the 7th day. It's already the night of the 8th. It's already after head of Shemesh. They entered the 8th day. And now it's almost like an external thing. You can't bring a korban at night, so wait until the morning. But you can't say that it's not yet the time, since just like even Chizkiah was moida, that on the 8th day, if I became tamei, say I'm the nazir, even though I didn't bring my korbanos, since it's roi to bring korbanos, at the end I'll bring 2 sets. So the same thing, Rabbi Yechanan views night as not being mechusar zman, not being premature. Now, does Rabbi Yechanan subscribe to that? Now we're going me'inyan le'inyan. This doesn't get more beautiful than this. What's this new topic? It's very much related. Something very similar. Azav. Azav is a person who had some sort of seminal unhealthy emission. They had it once, even though it was a seminal emission of a zav and not a healthy seminal emission, they have a din of a balkeri. Balkeri is someone who was tummy at a very low level. All they need to do really is go into the mikvah and sometimes wait until at night and they're good. If a person had 2 emissions, whether it was on the same day or whether it was on a consecutive day, but it must be on a consecutive day, they become a minor zav, for which they have to count 7 clean days. And if a person had 3 emissions, which is our topic, 3 re'iyos on the same day or on 2 days or on 3 consecutive days, 1, 1, and 1, then not only do they have to count 7 clean days, and they have to go into spring water on the 8th day, spring water on the 7th day, but they also have to bring karbanos, a set of karbanos. Same question. What happens if he's in the middle of counting his clean days and he has more emissions? Does he have to bring another set of karbanos? The answer is no, the same logic. If he had more emissions during the first tumah, it was an uninterrupted tumah, even though he's going to have to restart the count again, but it's not a new tumah. Mamash, the same thing. If he sees re'iyas on the 8th day, even though he didn't bring the karbanos yet, then there's nothing to talk about. That at the end, he has to bring 2 sets of karbanos because he began a new re'iyah because it was already the 8th day. Now here it gets a little bit more nuanced. What happens now? Let's begin reading. Ra achas balaylo. That means he had 3 emissions. He counted the 7 clean days, guys. He went to the mikvah. It's the night going into the 8th. He only had 1 re'iyah. That's very important. Only 1. And then he had the other 2 during the day. The night re'iyah, is that a ziva re'iyah? If a person would be tahar, how do we view them when they only have 1 re'iyah? It's only a balkeri. So what makes that into a zivus? The fact that they had a second emission. The second emission already happened that day. So we say the night prior is put to the day post. It's as if all 3 happened during the day. And therefore, Shtein Bayoim, maybe means that at the end, they're going to bring 2 sets of karbanos for the first re'iyah and for the second re'iyah. It was interrupted because the 7 days ended. You entered the 8th day. You even entered the 8th day time of the day. One of them was seen at night. One was seen at night. Since the first re'iyah of any zivus only has a din of a balkeri, it goes after what happens later. So we schlepped the night to the day. Now, what happens if you saw 2 by night? Now, I know that 2 re'iyahs doesn't oblige you to bring a carbon. But once you have 2 re'iyahs, you're called a zav. And it happened at night. Again, let's go into how do we view that? Is it already the 8th day or is it not the 8th day? And 1 by day, ain't a maybe. You know who says this? Rabbi Yechanan. It's gavaldik. If Rabbi Yechanan says that Laila lav mechusar zman, so gavaldik, which is why it's amazing. So Rabbi Yechanan should have said here also that even if you saw all of them at night, you have to bring another set of a carbon. We don't view light as premature. The night of the 8th is really considered the 8th. The Torah says only bring carbonos during the day. Okay, fine, that's an external technicality. But it's already the 8th day. Then afilu shtayim balayla ba'achas bayoyim also maybe. This is a real question. And the only solution the Gemara gives is that this statement that you quoted from Rabbi Yechanan was not his own opinion. It says the Gemara ki ka'amar Rabbi Yechanan. The second statement that even if you saw 2 by night and 1 by Yom Eino maybe, that's only according to the opinions who hold that by Kachim, the day Taka begins during the day. The night of the 8th is not the 8th. The night of the 8th in the Holy Temple is the 7th. Night goes after day. So you didn't even enter the 8th day. That Laila is Mechusar Zman. But Rabbi Yechanan, who himself does not subscribe to this, he'll hold. You became a Zov. You became Tar. You went through the 7 days. You went to the mikvah. Night of, you saw 2 re'iyas at night. You weren't even allowed to bring the carbon. It doesn't matter. If you see another, you have to have 3 re'iyas to be chayiv carbon. You're going to be chayiv 2 sets of carbonos. Now, if Rabbi Yechanan was only saying the statement according to those who opine that Laila is Mechusar Zman, the night of the 8th is not considered the 8th. It's premature, it's prior to the time, then the second statement is Pshita, which it is. Of course, if you saw 2 at night, even though you saw the 3rd during the day, so what? You became a Zav already at night. You became a Zav prior to the Chi of Karbanis. So the Gemara says, you're right. Rabbi Yechanan made that just a contrast, but the Chiddush was the first statement. That Shtayim Bayoim Ba'achas Balayla Itzrichalei. The Chiddush is the first case. What's the first case again? That you saw 1 at night, and there is a Chiddush. Because Salkadai Techamina, Ke'at Kafta, the Rab Shesha, Berei de Ravidi, in the Yaman and Krisis, where we're going to learn about this, Rab Shesha argues with this. This statement is only following Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef has this logic that since any Zav who has 1 emission only is a Balkari, so it's really the second one that makes him into a Zav. We don't say the second one retroactively created the Zivus from what happened prior. We say what happened prior is extended forward. And that's something that is debated. So Rabbi Yechanan wanted to tell you that he subscribes to Rabbi Yosef, that we view the night's Re'iyah, we put it to the day. And we don't put the days back to the night. But Rabbi Yechanan holds that Laila is not B'chusar Zman. And that all answers. So Rabbi Yechanan stands with this concept that once something is, there's tashlumin, only when there's a chiyuv. And in the case of a nazir, that's the word, that the night going into the 8th, according to Rabbi Yechanan, since there is a chiyuv to bring the karbanos, so the old tumah ended. And therefore, if he became tummy again, at the end he has to bring 2 sets of karbanos. You're not chayiv 2 sets. You're not chayiv 2 sets. Gewalt. All right, Chevra Baitim. Over Haregel v'loy chag, the Mishnah says that if the Yom Tov passed and you didn't bring the Chagiga, so in the case, for example, that you lost the animal, you're not chayiv b'achrayis. You don't have to. You don't have to compensate for it, right? You don't have to bring a new one. And again, just to speak out, if you didn't lose the carbon, that carbon cannot be hefker. It's not hefker, it's kachim. It will be brought, but not for Chagiga, because you missed the mitzvah. And the Mishnah says, the Tanach says, and that is what Shlomo HaMelech was saying regarding certain failings that are so bad that they are mu'uvis, that lo yuchal liska. It's something became so crooked that you can't straighten it out. And v'chesron, it's something that is lacking, that can no longer be lihimanos, that can no longer be counted. Now, a couple of details. First of all, Amalei ben Hey lehilel. So people who learn Pirkei Avos, as the minig as we do, we are familiar with ben Hey. This is the big Tosfos, guys. The 3rd to last Tosfos says Hey yesh mefarshim, that he is a ger. And why did they call him Hey? Is because when Abraham and Sarah, who were the first Jews, when they went up on a higher level of their connection to their godly soul, God added the letter Hey. That Tosfos says, "V'hainu ben Avraham and Sarah shenatoisav Hey bishman." And then Tosfos adds that when we find in other areas, like in Pirkei Avos, bag, Bag is Ben Gadim. And Bag, Beis and Gimel will say, sometimes a convert is called by the holy name of God, by the holy letter, the letter Hey. So anyway, so Ben Hey said Hillel, first of all, before its application, that it doesn't fit when it says that Chesron means something that's lacking. That cannot be what? When you say something that's lacking, what can you not do to it? You cannot fill it up. You can make a hole in the ground, and you can't properly fill it. The word should not be lo yuchay lihimonois. I mean, you know what it means to count. The words he asked lihimolois mi boile. You should not lihimonois. The word should have been lihimolois. Not that it's not something that could be counted. It's not something that could be filled up properly. So therefore, Ella was also said that by hey. So he's adding, there is something else here. There's another illusion. Here, we're not speaking about someone who did a sin. Here, the concept that you can't be counted means that there ain't a doima learning Torah with a group, for example, than learning Torah on your own. And that doesn't only go to learning Torah. The Rebbe wanted Torah should be learned with a minyan, plus that goes to any mitzvah. There's a power of doing the same mitzvah together with everyone else. And if someone was invited to join a group and they did not join the count, even though they did the mitzvah, that's also what Shlomo HaMelech is referring to. Elozeh shemanu chaveirav ledvar mitzvah. His chaverim invited him, why didn't you do the mitzvah with us? And he didn't join them, even though he did the mitzvah. But since he didn't do it in their count, that's the word count. That's the meaning of lo yuchal lihimanes. And now the Gemara says, you know what? That he was machaving. Indeed, Tanya nami hachim. It says in a brayso that mu'uvas lo yuchal liskoin. Now this is what the Alter Rebbe in the beginning of Ageres HaTshuva, the Alter Rebbe is speaking about the whole concept, how much tshuva is needed for you to be completely wiped clean. That there's a little bit of a discrepancy. On one hand, we say that for mitzvahs asay, we have the senyuma eino zaz misham at shemoichlomai. If you have a mitzvahs asay and the mitzvahs lois asay, then you already need to have tshuva and Yom Kippur, which sounds like the violation of Allah is more severe. It takes longer for you to get corrected. On the other hand, esodei chaloisasa seems to imply that an asay has more weight. That's the beginning of Igeres HaTshuva. And the Alter Rebbe explains about that when a person doesn't keep a positive mitzvah, the light that should have come into the world will never be introduced into the world again. And that's why for every mitzvah saseh, that's the chazal over here. Even though on one hand, we're saying that if I violated the law, how do you violate a law? By doing something. How do you violate an aseh? By not doing. So a rebellion against God that's passive is not as serious as. That's why as far as tshuva is concerned, for punishment, it's easier for an aseh than for a lois aseh. But as far as what really happened, not my rebellion against God, that's the chazal. That you know what's a ma'uvus liyachaliskan, that bittul kriyash mashal shachris, a person missed one shema. Because the light of godliness that could have been brought into the world from that shema is not going to be in the world. Or kriyash mashal arvis, or bittul tefilla shal shachris, or tefilla shal arvis. And what's v'chesrein liyuchalihi manois? This is the raya to ben hey. Or Tehilel, Zeshenimnu Chaveirav Var Mitzvah, even though he did the mitzvah on his own. But since for Hulay Nimna Imayim, he's not counted like you can't make up for that. Now, Amalei, now that we are quoting Ben Hey Tehilel, so let's go a little bit further. Amalei Ben Hey Hillel, my Dichsip. What's the meaning of a pasuk in Malachi? V'shaftem eruisem, you will return and see the difference between a tzaddik and a rasha. The difference between someone who is an oived Elohim, someone who's in service of God, la'asher loy avadi, to someone who's not in the service of God. Now, at the first glance, what does this sound like? Who's a tzaddik? An oived Elohim. Who's a rasha? Someone who's not an oived Elohim. So if you're repeating yourself, hainu tzaddik, hainu oived Elohim, hainu rasha, hainu loy avadi. So answers Hillel to Ben Hey, Omar Lei, no. That you're going to the difference between a tzaddik and a rosh. And on top of that, you're going to see that even in a tzaddik, you have a tzaddik that's avodoi and you have a tzaddik that's loy avodoi. Avodoi v'loy avodoi, both of them, tarvayu tzaddike gemuraninu. Now, before we go on, we're Hasidic. We got to say the Alter Rebbe, Tanya Perek Tezvav, begins with this quote. The Alter Rebbe innovates that this is also true by a Beinani. And as the Alter Rebbe explains, who's the Beinani? The Beinani is someone that the inner person, Moichin and Midas, are not rectified. But the Machshava Dibur U'Maisa is doing exactly what God wants for them to do. The question is, how difficult is it? So certain people, the Alter Rebbe says, they're Kalta people. They're not burning. They're not redheads. So they don't sin. Shkoyach. It's loy avadai. They're not sinning. They're not sinning, but it's not difficult. The avadai is someone who doesn't sin. But for him not sinning, did he have to do avodah? So by the Beinani, you have both. Here in the Gemara, we're speaking about avadai and loy avadai by Yatzadik Gama. And what will that refer to? That the Eina Doime, you can't compare someone who learns this Pedic, someone who learns the teaching of Torah, reviewing it 100 times. Wow, but that's already the norm. That's called, that wasn't work. That's the norm. To someone who learns it 101. 101 times, you went the extra time, you're the Avodoi. Amalei, so Ben Hey tells Sila, ich verstehe nicht. Just because he learned between one time and 101. The one who did it 100, that's loy avadai. He said, yeah. Why? Because the concept of regilus, that once a person is habituated in doing something, to repeat and do it again is considered loy avadai. There's no avoida. And going beyond your comfort zone, even one little step, that's called avadai. And the proof is, say ulamad, mishuk shal chamarim. And how meaningful is it when we know al pi Chasidus that the chamoid refers to the choimer of the nefesh habahamis? Because that's really what we're talking about. The avoiders with the chamoid, with our own chamoid. That asara parse bezuzah. The normal rate was if you hire someone's donkey to schlep your stuff for 10 parsa, you pay a coin. Now, if you want to now scale it, you would argue that when would you have to pay 2 coins? 20 parsa. But that's not what they did it. If you only hired him to go for 1 additional parsa, 10, you pay 1. 11, 3 zuzah. Why? Because he's going beyond his regilus. There's so much to say here. There's a kleyakar in Parshas Voschanan that he says that it's known, and then we'll make it known like this: that loy avadoi. What's the Rosh Tevis? Lamed ayin. What is that? 100. 100. Loy avadoi. Asher loy avadoi. That's the 101. And then the Kliyakar says, that's the known. Then the Kliyakar says, I'll tell you my own. So he says that remembering in Lashon HaKodesh, Zecher, right? Zayin Ches Reish is 227. Shochach is 328. The numerical difference is 101. That if you want to stop forgetting, which we all want to stop forgetting, here's the problem. You got to learn it 101 times. That's how you go from forgetting to remembering. Now, let's go back.
Rabbi.
Yes,
Rabbi. Amalek. Amal Kuf. Stop at 100.
Love it. Shkoyach Yaakov. Stop at 100. That's Amalek. Now, Amalei Elyahu bar hey. Imagine. Elyahu Navi tells about hey. Or the version Eliyah Navi came and told Rabbi Lazar, what's the meaning of the pasuk? That God is saying that he needs God says, I will refine you. You meaning me, us, the Jewish people. But not the way silver is refined. Guys, silver is refined in fire. The yichus. We're not going to be refined in fire. No, thank God. But the problem is God says, I have chosen you bikur oini, in a crucible of poverty. In other words, how does God refine us? Through anius. And melamed, God was looking, what good midah could he give the Jew? And what did God find? Anius. And on that, this is the meaning of what people say, that that beautiful is poverty to the Jew, like a red strap for a susya chibara, to a white horse. Now, like we spoke out in the introduction, like everyone asks, Baba Basra Kufta Zayin, that kasha anius, more than 50 makas, that an ani is chashav kemes, that we are not a religion that we look forward to poverty. Poverty is a sign of a hesed of God, of a concealment of God. So what are we talking about? The Kotzker Rebbe said a gewaldige Worte. He says about us not showing off our wealth. That is the beauty of the Yid. That is what it really means. And he gives an example that when would they put the red strap on a white horse? When would they do that? When you're working with your horse in the field, you don't dress it up. When the horse is in the stable, you don't dress it up. White in our context is wealth. Let's go on. The red, in this context, is something not positive, poverty. When you're selling the horse, when you're parading the horse in public, that's when you put a red strap. That what's the most beautiful midah of a Jew is that even when they are wealthy, it's not like you go into certain houses down the block. The house is this big, but the front of the house with the pillars looks like a palace. I have a house next to me. It's amazing. The opposite. The house should be beautiful, and the outside should be simple. And that's the biggest midah tova. Not to show, not to flaunt, like modesty. And it doesn't only mean wealth. It also means wealth. It means anything. That's the beauty, and that's the way we become more refined. More refined means that we have to grow mechayil al chayil. But the downside sometimes is that a person grows and they become arrogant. So God chooses us because even when a Yid grows, he remains humble. That's the pshat, Dr. Kotzker Rebbe. Let's go weiter. Let's go further. What's this crooked thing that cannot be straightened? Like we learned in the Mishnah, Zabala Erva. God forbid a person had a relation with a woman with whom a relation is a shiur kares, and therefore, and on top of that, she conceived and she gave birth to a child, and now there's a mamzir. He can do the biggest tshuva, but the sin is a living being. Now the Gemara asks a big question. That implies that when is the sin the end of the world? Only if hoiled. You can't fix it if they gave birth, which implies that loy hoiled, if a man had a relation with a woman where there's a shiur kares. But if she didn't give birth, then you can't say it's unfixable. You can do tshuva. How can you say that? Goinef is a person who steals in the hiding. That's goinef. Goizel is someone who steals in your face. Goinef adam. Person can rectify it. Give back what you took. And if you lost it, give back its value. Even goizel is worse because you scared the person. You're robbing. Armed robber. Also, if a man has a relation with a married woman, what's the halacha? If she had the relation willingly, she can no longer be with her husband. You can't fix that. This person has no solution. And that's the kasha. So here you see, it's not about having a child, a mamzer. It's just having the relation. Now, before we come to the answer, let's keep on reading the Braisa, like we had in our Mishnah. Just more details. He says, Rab Shimon Bar Yochai in the Mishnah says that the only thing that's mu'uves liyuchal liskain is only in reference to a person that was previously perfect. If the person from the outset was not perfect, no matter how great of a failing he did, atenek shenishba. That's basically what he's saying. You can't say crooked unless it was previously straight. And the example he gives is that if a person shechts a kosher animal type, here is where you can have shilas. Is it kosher? Is it not kosher? But if a person, he says, shechts a camel, he's never going to go to the Rav and say, Bakru Gamal, can you inspect the lungs to see if it has a glat? Is it not glat? Bakru Chazir. You don't say that because it was never potentially good to begin with. Elo, you only say this, Bakru Taleh. In other words, this concept of King Solomon is like the woe that is a mistake, it can't be fixed. That tragedy is only if it could have been straight. In other words, who is that? That's only the Talmud Chachem Sheperish Min HaTorah. Another opinion. Called Talmud Chacham Sheperish Min HaTorah. All of our Kosovim and the pasuk says, it's like a bird that had a nest, but the Chacham, the bird, hopped away from its nest. It's people who never had the Torah, they never had a place. Now that we found our place, like how tragic is it to walk away from it? And we have another pasuk where King Solomon is lamenting, what failing did the people find in me, says God, and that is only what we are referring to. It's not about the sin, it's about the person. So the Gemara's bottom line is that even in the first opinion, Rab Shimon ben Asya clearly is speaking about having a relation even without having children. Answers the Gemara like Kasha. Depends. If a man, God forbid, has a relation, just as an example, with his non-married sister, just as an example, we're trying to find a erva where there's a kadis. It's kadis. And here, if there's no moms, no child, there's no mamzer. She was not married. Here you can do tshuva. But the Braisa is be'eshasish. So even if the union doesn't create a child, she becomes asura l'bayla. Or ve'iba yisema, even both of them, our Mishnah and the Braisa are speaking about a married woman. V'lei kashe kan daf yud bo'inus. Bo'inus means if she's not married to a kohen, if a man, God forbid, if he rapes a woman, she doesn't become asura to her husband, and therefore, the Braisa doesn't fit. The me'uvas will only be if there's a mamzer. But kan, the Braisa is if she did it willingly. And ve'iba you say mahava haba einus. And again, havachi kan the eishes kohen. That will be the Braisa. That's why just the union is a me'uvas lo yuchal liskoin. And our Mishnah is be'eishes Yisrael that if there's no mamzer as a child, then the consequences are some things that could be rectified. Now we continue going back to the other two Tanoim that applied the me'uvas lo yuchal liskoin, not about the sin that one did, but about who the sinner. Who did it? And that is something, that statement that you can never be fixed, that's only on someone that in the outset was right, was straight, the Talmud Chacham, a Jew in the Beis HaMikdash, not a Jew of Gol. Jew of Golos to begin with was crooked. So it says in Zechari Vila Yoitze Vila Ba, to the one who's going and coming, there will never be peace. This is not a positive verse. What does that refer to? Amarav. That refers also to Al Talmud Chacham, and now we're speaking about not someone who left the observant lifestyle. Here we're speaking about people that they were into one level of learning that's considered superior, and they lowered the content of their limud, and that's also a mistake that can be fixed. You won't find peace. Now, what's a downgrade? Reb Danny Fishman will be very happy with the statement that someone who learns Gemara and then they go on to learn Shulchan Aruch. That's the downgrade. Mamish. Kiven sheyoytze adam midvar halacha lidvar mikra. First one is you go from Mishnayos, just to know halacha then was Mishnayos. You go back to Chumash. So that's called shuvein le'shalom. He won't find peace, like Rashi says, because you would paskin then from Mishnayos. You try to paskin from Chumash. Can't. So you won't find peace. Or no, the second statement goes with Reb Fishman. V'shmuel amar zehapoidish mi Talmud l'mishnah. Someone who learns Gemara. What's Gemara? Gemara, I know that it's very difficult to extrapolate halacha from the Gemara. But at least in the Gemara, you learn the tamei, you learn the reasons behind the halachas. If a person purely learns Mishnah, then unless they are facing a case exactly like the one in Shulchan Aruch, don't you dare paskin, because you don't understand what's behind it. So people who learn Talmud and then they go down to Mishnah, they're not going to find peace. Rabbi Yechanan adds even another detail. Listen to this. Now, guys, don't forget that Rabbi Yechanan compiled the Talmud Yerushalmi. We're going to read Rashi, we'll read Tosfos. You have another 2 minutes. Rabbi Yechanan says that is even changing from one Gemara to another Gemara. You finished learning Talmud Bavli. Let's go learn Talmud Yerushalmi. 1 second, not that quick. Let's read inside Rashi. What's Talmud or Talmud? That's someone who was learning Talmud Yerushalmi first. Then he went to Talmud Bavli. So says Rashi, he won't find peace. You know why he won't find peace? Because Talmud Yerushalmi is a lot easier. Zok Rashi. And Talmud Bavli is a lot deeper. I just want to tell people over here that from our perspective, which is so far away from the way it's going to be, the way it should be, learning Talmud Yerushalmi is a lot harder. We learn Shkolim, it's different. But the Rashi says that the depth that we find in Bavli is not found in Yerushalmi, and as we have in Sanhedrin and in other places, that the pasuk of b'machshakim hoshivani, right, the pasuk in Eicha, that in darkness, that Bavli is called the Talmud of darkness, because just like when you are in a dark room and you can't see and you're looking for the door, you have to tap and you have to analyze everything. Okay, this is not the door, this is just a window, this is just this. In Talmud Yerushalmi, there's a lot more light. So when there's light, on one hand, it's great because you see the light. But you don't have to develop your analytical skills as much in Talmud Yerushalmi. And who said that? Rabbi Yechanan. So if someone goes from Talmud Yerushalmi, which is simpler, and they go to Talmud Bavli, that's what Rashi says, they're not going to find, they're going to have a hard time. Tosfos says, punkt verkehrt. Tosfos says the opposite. Tosfos says the Seder is first you learn Talmud Bavli, but you have to master it. And he quotes either the gear says Rab Zera, or that Rab Zera fasted 100 fasts. Remember to forget Talmud Bavli in order to learn Talmud Yerushalmi. So his point is, first you have to master one area in Torah. And then you have to upgrade yourself. And it's an exponential upgrade, which is why Chassidus says you have to fast. There's Ilu Ba'al and there's Yesh Me'ayin. The jump is such a quantum jump that you have to forget the old to get to the new. But before you move on to another area of limud, you have to first master the first. That is what these Sukkim are referring to. And that's something that's crooked, that cannot get straightened out because you're going to feel the pain. And all of that is a tremendous limud schus, meaning that people who were never straight, and that goes on all of the Yidden and Galus, that no matter, God forbid, how great our feelings are, we cannot apply this verse, that this is a mistake that cannot be straightened out because we were never straight to begin with, which is another reason why we need to have Mashiach, and then that's the Talmud Chacham, then we'll be with the Shechina, and then we won't feel anymore. Maybe merit that today, Amen, to be continued.
Rabbi, so why 100 and not 101 and not 60 and 68? So the Alter Rebbe says that there is a malach, his name is Mas, Mem Samech, which is 100, and every time you learn 101, you are defeat the malach, the forgetfulness of.
I'll tell you another. That Rizal says that the Samach Mem, we don't say Samuel. The Samach Mem is 100. It's all the same. Amalek. In other words, first of all, learn everything 100 times. We should try it.
101.
No, I know. I'm saying 100 is Teva. Not to forget you learn 100. But everyone learns 100. You want to be an oived. An oived means you want to do work. You got to do more than the norm. And the norm is 100. Now, for us, the norm is twice. I don't know, or thrice. Learn a nachamol, nach einmal. The other time is the oived elikim. Chavira, let's go down.
I had a quick question.
Yes, Samach.
Just you mentioned that in the Hakdama Pekei Chivrim, the story with Beshenkovich. What was the Avei? I thought the whole story was that the Balagala became the Mashpia in that story.
Ist gewesen, als gehabt nicht jüdische Kinder und sie sind getrunken geworden.
Das gewesen Asher Zelig's Kinder?
Der Balschuva's Kinder sind betrunken geworden, sind gestorben. Das ist eine Sache, was man teuer sagen darf auf dem Internet. Ich will gehen in Tefilla.